Welcome to Life Stories. Have you ever been overlooked your entire life, always the one left standing in the shadows while everyone else shines? Imagine being the punchline at a family gathering, laughed at for your failures, until one quiet moment changes everything. One act of defiance that no one saw coming. Tonight's story is about a woman who was dismissed for years, belittled for every choice she made, and yet she built something remarkable in silence. What happens when you stop shrinking for others and finally stand up for yourself? Stay with us, because this is the story of a sister, a mother, and the moment that defined everything. Let's dive in. Emma had never felt more out of place than she did standing at the entrance of her sister Natalie's birthday party. The rooftop venue was everything you'd expect from someone like Natalie. Expensive decorations, champagne towers, and a crowd that seemed to exist solely for the spectacle. Natalie was the center of it all, as usual, with her dazzling beauty, effortless charm, and a social media following that made people look at her as if she were a living, breathing icon. Everyone loved her, admired her, and celebrated her success. And yet, in that room, Emma felt invisible. She wasn't alone in her struggle. The years of being the other daughter, the one who never quite fit, had worn her down. At 32, she was a single mother, raising her son Jack on her own. Every day was a balancing act of two part-time jobs, one at a bakery and the other as an admin assistant at a dental office. Her life wasn't glamorous. It wasn't filled with fancy dinners, spa treatments, or designer clothes. It was quiet, humble, and honest. Emma had learned how to make $5 stretch like $20, how to go without, so her son would never know what it meant to want for anything. But in that room, surrounded by the laughter and clinking glasses, Emma couldn't escape the feeling that she was a constant reminder of what not to become. Her mother, Karen, always cared about appearances. Her nails were perfectly manicured, her smile wide and welcoming, a mask for the deep-rooted need to impress. And then there was her father, Michael, who never stood up for her, not when she needed him most. He would disappear into his phone or pour himself another glass of wine when things got tense, avoiding conflict like it was his only way of surviving their family's dysfunction. And Natalie, her younger sister, was the golden child. Beautiful, popular, with everything handed to her on a silver platter, Natalie had always been the one to shine, and Emma had always been the one left in the shadows. Despite everything, Emma had come to the party, not because she wanted to be there, but because her mother had asked, no, demanded that she come. It was the same every year. Natalie's parties were grandiose, but they were also filled with barbs and passive-aggressive comments, veiled as jokes. Emma had promised herself this time would be different. She wasn't going to let the sting of the past ruin the evening. She wanted her son to see something different, something better than the quiet suffering of his mother. Jack was her world. He had always been so perceptive, so much more aware of the world than a child his age should have been. Every time someone made a comment about her, Emma could see it in his eyes, the confusion, the hurt. He didn't deserve to see her like this, as a second-class citizen in a family that seemed to forget she was even there. As they walked into the party, Emma tried to ignore the sharp glances from the guests. She made sure Jack was comfortable, finding him a spot near the corner away from the crowd, hoping he wouldn't notice the looks people gave them. But then Natalie appeared, her silver gown shimmering under the lights as she effortlessly glided toward them. "Hey," Natalie said, barely looking Emma's way. "Happy birthday." Her voice was sweet, sugary, a mockery of kindness. Then, turning to Jack, she added, "Hey, kiddo," as if she were trying to make up for the sting of her earlier comment. Emma smiled, her lips tight. She wasn't going to let Natalie's cutting words get to her. Not this time. The party was in full swing. The band playing soft jazz in the background, waiters circulating with trays of mini crab cakes and sparkling drinks. People laughed, mingled, and pretended to be happy. Emma felt more invisible than ever, like she was standing in the middle of a room full of strangers, pretending to be part of something she would never belong to. But there was one thing that kept her going, something she had been planning for weeks, something no one expected. It wasn't about the money or the recognition. It was about something bigger, something that would show her family who she really was, who she had become in spite of them. The evening wore on, and just as Emma had feared, Natalie took the stage, basking in the spotlight like she always did. She thanked everyone for coming, for making her feel like royalty, and then, with the exaggerated charm that only she could muster, she turned to the gifts. "Open your gifts, Lena," someone called out. The crowd cheered, clapping their hands like they were watching a performance. Emma stood at the edge of the crowd, holding Jack's hand tightly. He was getting tired, leaning against her with his head resting on her shoulder. She told him they would leave soon, just a few more minutes. Then, Natalie held up the envelope Emma had given her when they arrived. It was simple, ordinary, and painfully out of place in her perfectly manicured hands. "What's this?" Natalie said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She waved the envelope in the air, like it was some kind of joke. "Oh, it's from Emma." The crowd turned to look at Emma. The laughter started as a low murmur, but soon it crescendoed into a cruel chorus of mocking chuckles. Natalie waved the envelope like it was something insignificant. "I guess she couldn't afford wrapping paper," she said, her words slicing through the air. The laughter rang in Emma's ears, sharp and unforgiving. Even Karen joined in, her laugh soft and nervous, but it was a laugh nonetheless. Michael looked away, pretending to check his phone. But Jack didn't understand. His wide eyes looked up at Emma, confused. "Why is she saying that?" he whispered. Emma bent down to his level, her heart breaking for him. "It's okay, sweetheart. She just doesn't understand," she whispered back, forcing a smile. But something inside Emma snapped. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something deeper. A quiet, unshakable strength rose from within her, and for the first time in her life she felt something she hadn't in years. Power. Without saying a word, she let go of Jack's hand and walked through the crowd. She could feel the eyes on her, the whispers, the laughter, but none of it mattered anymore. "Go ahead," she said, her voice calm, steady, as she stood in front of Natalie. "Open it." Natalie, thrown off by Emma's calmness, smirked and ripped open the envelope dramatically, expecting something insignificant. But what she found stopped her cold. Her eyes scanned the check in disbelief. She read the letter, then the check again. The room fell silent. The band stopped playing. The waiters froze in place. Emma's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She stood there, calm, unshaken, knowing exactly what she had done. Natalie couldn't speak. She looked around, confused, her lips parted but nothing coming out. The entire room was watching, waiting for her to react, but for the first time, Natalie was speechless. And Emma was finally seen. Have you ever been underestimated by those closest to you? What would you do if you had the chance to prove them wrong? As Emma stood there, not needing to say a word, she knew something had shifted. Not just in Natalie, but in her family. For once, they weren't looking down on her. They were looking up, and she had done it without raising her voice. But Emma wasn't finished yet. What happens next? Does Natalie finally understand? Or is this just the beginning of a larger confrontation? Emma walked away from Natalie, the silence between them growing heavier with each step. She didn't look back, but she could feel the weight of the entire room on her shoulders. The envelope was still clutched tightly in her hand. The check now an undeniable symbol of everything she had worked for, everything she had built in the quiet, unnoticed hours of her life. As she made her way toward the exit, she could hear the murmurs behind her, the soft gasp of realization, the tentative questions that followed. The truth was out now. She had proven herself, but something inside her felt unresolved. She had expected to feel triumphant, victorious, but instead there was a hollow emptiness. She opened the door to the rooftop, the cool night air hitting her like a breath of fresh air. Jack was still by the elevator, his little face full of questions she couldn't yet answer. He had seen her stand tall, seen her refuse to shrink away, but he hadn't fully understood what it meant. "Mom, are we going now?" he asked softly, his voice still tinged with confusion from the earlier scene. Emma nodded, forcing a smile as she crouched down to his level. Yeah, buddy, let's go home. She took his hand in hers and led him to the car, her heart heavier than it had been before. She wasn't sure what she was feeling. Pride, relief, anger, all of it mixed into a knot that refused to untangle. As she drove away from the party, the streetlights casting fleeting shadows across her windshield, Emma couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't over. The look on Natalie's face haunted her. It wasn't just shock. It was something else. A flicker of fear, maybe guilt, or was it disbelief? She had expected to see anger, resentment, but what she had seen instead was vulnerability. Was it possible? Could Natalie, the one who had always looked down on her, truly change? Emma tried to push the thought away. She didn't need Natalie's validation. She had proven to herself that she was capable, that she had built something meaningful. She had taken the reins of her own life. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the subtle pull of a hope she'd buried long ago. The hope that maybe, just maybe, her family could see her for who she really was, not the failure they had always labeled her as. When they got home, Emma let Jack go straight to bed, knowing the events of the night had worn him out. She could feel the ache of exhaustion in her own bones, but something else gnawed at her, something she couldn't ignore. It was like the door she had opened with her bold move had led her down a path she wasn't ready for, a path that held more questions than answers. She went into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, trying to calm the storm inside her. She hadn't wanted the attention. She hadn't wanted to be the center of the room. All she wanted was to make a point, to show Natalie and maybe herself that she was more than they had ever given her credit for. But now that the moment was over, she realized that the statement she'd made had come at a cost. The phone on the counter buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text message from Natalie. "Can we talk?" Emma stared at the words for a long moment. She had expected something, maybe an apology, maybe a confrontation. But this was different. It wasn't the anger she had anticipated, the snide remarks or biting sarcasm. It was an invitation, and it made her uneasy. She didn't want to talk to Natalie, not because she was angry, but because she wasn't sure what she'd say. She wasn't sure what she needed anymore. For so long, she had yearned for validation from her family. But now, in the wake of everything that had happened, she wasn't sure if that was what she still wanted. She thought of the check, the $25,000 she had handed Natalie with quiet confidence. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It wasn't just about the money. It was about proving to herself that she could achieve something real, something tangible, without anyone's help or approval. But now, as she stood there in the silence of her kitchen, the question lingered. Had she done it for herself? Or had she done it to force her family to finally see her? The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her mother, Karen. "I saw what you did tonight. Your father and I are proud of you." Emma's stomach turned. Proud? Was that the best they could do? After all these years of silence, all the missed birthdays, all the quiet dismissals, they were proud of her now? The words felt hollow, like a poorly written script in a movie she didn't want to star in. She didn't respond to either message. She didn't know how. What was there to say? She had spent her entire life trying to fit into a mold that never suited her, trying to make herself small enough to be accepted. And now, finally, she had broken free from that mold. She had built something on her own, and in doing so, she had become someone new. But she wasn't sure she knew who that was anymore. The next morning, the weight of the previous night still hung heavily over her. The silence from her family continued. No more texts, no more calls. For once, Emma wasn't on the receiving end of their judgment or their hollow approval. The emptiness she had feared the most had become a strange kind of freedom. But then the doorbell rang. Emma opened it to find her mother standing there, her face tight with something that looked like regret. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking at Emma as if trying to read her, to understand her. Finally, Karen spoke. "I'm sorry, Emma. I didn't know what to say last night. You're right. We've always treated you differently, and that's not fair. Emma felt a flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by doubt. Was this real? Was her mother finally seeing her? Or was this just another apology that would fade when the moment passed? Before Emma could respond, Karen handed her a small, neatly wrapped package. "It's from Natalie," Karen said softly. She wanted me to give it to you." Emma opened the package slowly, her heart racing. Inside was a gold bracelet, simple, elegant, with a tag that read, "To the strongest sister I know." The gesture was small, but the weight of it felt monumental. Emma didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to feel. The road to understanding, to healing, was long, and she wasn't sure it would ever be complete. But she could feel something shifting inside her, a new chapter unfolding, one that didn't depend on her family's approval or validation. Have you ever received an apology that didn't feel genuine? How do you know when someone truly sees you for who you are? For the first time in years, Emma didn't need to rush. She didn't need to find the answers or fix the broken pieces. The change had already begun, slow, steady, like the tide pulling away the sand. But would the family ever truly change? And would Emma ever find peace with them or with herself? Emma had spent the last few days walking on a fine line between hope and doubt, trying to make sense of what had happened at the party, trying to figure out what it all meant. For the first time in her life, the silence of her family felt like a blessing, like a pause in a long, weary song. She hadn't heard from Natalie or her parents, and part of her wanted to believe it was because they were finally processing everything, really seeing her for who she was for the first time in years. But as she looked at Jack playing in the living room, the weight of the check, of the gesture she had made, of all the silent battles she had fought, still hung heavy on her heart. She had been quiet for so long, waiting for them to acknowledge her, for them to notice. And yet, it wasn't just their acknowledgement she needed. It was her own. The bracelet her mother had given her, the one from Natalie, still sat on her dresser, untouched. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate it. It was just that, for the first time, Emma had come to realize that the approval she had been chasing for so long was no longer the one that mattered. She had built something real. She had done it without anyone's help, without needing to prove anything to anyone. But in the stillness of her house, in the quiet moments when Jack wasn't looking, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The doorbell rang one evening, as if on cue. Emma stood up, startled from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not Natalie. But when she opened the door, there she stood, her younger sister, the ever-perfect Natalie, now looking uncharacteristically small, vulnerable even. "I?" Natalie hesitated, her usual confident smile nowhere to be found. "Can we talk?" Emma studied her, trying to read the sincerity in her sister's eyes. For years, Natalie had been the one to make her feel invisible, the one who had never failed to remind Emma of her place in their family. But now, standing before her, she looked unsure, uncertain. There was no pretension in her voice, no hidden mockery in her tone. "Sure," Emma said, her voice calm but with a note of caution. "Come in." They sat in the living room, the air between them thick with years of unspoken words. Jack, oblivious to the weight of the conversation unfolding, was in his room, playing with his toys. Natalie glanced around the room, her eyes settling on the modest surroundings. She shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable, but it was the soft sigh she let out that caught Emma's attention. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you," Natalie said slowly, her voice wavering. I I don't know what came over me at the party. I've always been the one to make jokes, to perform. But this time, I went too far." Emma said nothing, waiting for her sister to continue, feeling the familiar tension rise, but also a strange flicker of hope. "Emma, I didn't realize how much I hurt you," Natalie admitted, her eyes downcast. "I thought if I could be the center of attention, everything would be okay. But I see now that I've been the one hiding behind my image, behind the approval I always sought from everyone around me." Emma felt the words hit her like a wave, overwhelming and unexpected. She had always hoped for this moment, but hearing it, seeing her sister so raw and vulnerable, made her feel a strange mix of relief and confusion. And the check, Natalie continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never felt more ashamed in my life. You've always been there, quiet, steady, working so hard, and I never saw it. I never saw you for who you really are. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of years of hurt. Emma didn't know what to say. Her heart was torn between the part of her that wanted to forgive, that wanted to believe in the sincerity of this moment, and the part of her that had spent so long protecting herself from this very vulnerability. She finally spoke, her voice quieter than usual. I don't know if I can just forgive everything, Nat. You've made me feel like nothing for so long. It's not just about that night. It's about every time I've tried to show you who I am, and you've turned away. But I understand that people make mistakes, and maybe we can start fresh. I'm not asking for you to fix everything, but for once, I want to feel like I'm seen, like I'm worth something. Natalie nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't know how to fix everything, Emma. I've made so many mistakes, and I don't expect you to just forgive me. But I want to try. I want to be there for you, for Jack. The room felt lighter, but Emma wasn't sure if it was the weight of the apology or the unexpected tenderness of her sister's words. She had spent so long convincing herself that forgiveness wasn't possible, that some wounds ran too deep to heal. But sitting there with Natalie, she realized that healing didn't always come with grand gestures or apologies that fixed everything. Sometimes healing came with acceptance. Acceptance of the past and of each other's imperfections. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that wasn't filled with resentment, but with a fragile understanding, the kind of silence that left room for the possibility of something new. Just as Emma was about to speak, Jack came running into the room, his face bright and innocent, completely unaware of the emotional conversation they had just had. Mom, can we go get ice cream? He asked, his eyes wide with excitement. Emma smiled at him, her heart swelling with love. Yeah, buddy, let's go. As she stood up, Natalie watched her, her expression softening even further. I'm really sorry, Emma. I'll do better, for you and for Jack. Emma nodded, a faint smile on her lips. I know. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. There was still a long way to go, and the road to healing would be uneven, full of bumps and setbacks. But for the first time, Emma wasn't afraid to walk it. She wasn't waiting for permission anymore. She was finally standing on her own 2 feet, surrounded by the people who had once overlooked her, but now seeing her for who she truly was. As she and Jack walked out the door, Emma glanced back one last time, feeling something shift inside her. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't chasing after anyone's approval. She had built her own life, her own strength, and in that quiet, powerful moment, she realized that was enough. What do you think about the journey Emma has gone through? Do you think Natalie's apology is enough, or is there more to be healed? If you enjoyed this story, drop a 100 in the comments below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Feel free to share this story with your friends. Thanks for watching Life Stories.